Hello everybody and welcome to the second episode of Was It Scary? So, very short summary of what this series is if you didn't watch the first episode, which you should watch. This is going to be a more regular series on the channel that's a bit more casual, where I'm going to basically go and talk about nostalgic series, nostalgic creepypasta videos and games, and whether I think that they still hold up today. I know the title might sound a little weird, Was It Scary? Because that's implying that I'm, asking if it used to be scary. The reason that I have the title like that is because I'm asking, was it scary by today's standards? Which, speaking of that, I kind of wrote down an actual parameter. What I do for these videos is I don't script them, but I do have a bunch of bullet points written down so they're more structured. And what I wrote down is, these are my current parameters. These could change. I'm always open to criticism, so let me know if these sound good or not. One is, how dated is the story? How dated does it sound? Are there a bunch of terms that we would find cliche? Does the video have a bunch of really cheap jump scares and nonsense that wouldn't really faze somebody today? Does the game have a bunch of overdone things that maybe back then would have been scary but today aren't at all? The second thing is, how easy is it to suspend your disbelief when you're watching, reading, or playing this piece of media? And the final thing is, how, obviously, would people receive it today? So those are my parameters currently. So yeah, let's just get this done, okay? As you can see, my channel's on life support, so we need to be as consistent as possible. That's what these videos are for as well. It's to kind of fill in the space, but I want to get better at this casual content because you never know. Just because my channel's on life support right now does not mean it always will be if I actually stay consistent for a few months. So one of these episodes could blow up, and I need to make sure that it's pretty entertaining. So obviously, if you read the title, looked at the thumbnail, you already know the story today is Dead Bart. Very popular story. It's my first lost episode creepypasta here, and it starts off with the author talking about a weirdly numbered episode of The Simpsons called Dead Bart that was later replaced with Moaning Lisa. And this episode was so dastardly that if you asked anybody that was around Matt Groening at the time, they would be very, very angry, and they would say, don't bring that episode up ever again. And Witness Reports basically said that, Matt Groening was super freaked out and acting super weird after the episode was made. He was very perturbed, as we'll say. And this was kind of a rumor, a cryptid, a secret among the Simpsons fandom, allegedly. And one day at a convention, someone asked Dan Silverman about it, and Dan Silverman just walked off. He didn't even acknowledge it at all. And that's when our writer heard about it for the first time. And so the author goes on to say how basically the episode was so horrible that anyone involved with the creation of the episode will not let anyone ask Matt Groening about it. So the author ends up following Matt Groening because nobody stopped them, and they ask him about the episode. Now, obviously, that goes a little bit against the rules established in this story, so we're gonna have to knock off some suspension of disbelief points. To add to that, though, when they ask Matt Groening about this episode, instead of him just being like, I don't know what you're talking about, and walking off, he instead gets really scared and writes down a website on a piece of paper that he for some reason has memorized and hands it to him. Now, the reason that I find this a bit weird is because why would Matt Groening have an archive online of an episode that was allegedly so disturbing that no one will bring it up? Why does he have an archive? Why does he have that archive memorized in his brain? And why did he just choose to write it down and give it to this random person so they wouldn't ask him about the episode anymore? Because couldn't they just take that episode and spread it around everywhere? But it gets even weirder. They go home and they put this mysterious website that they made sure to let us know they won't be telling us because they don't want us to download the episode, of course. They go on this website, they download the episode, and without opening the file, their computer starts quote-unquote glitching and acting like the worst virus they'd ever received or something to that. I don't know why I said quote-unquote. That, something to that effect. And of course, my first thought was, how is it infecting your computer if you never opened it? All it did was download. Now, I'm not a computer expert. Maybe there's something I don't know, but from my understanding, it doesn't work like that. But here's what's even weirder. It gets weirder. What's even weirder is they somehow, despite their computer, they couldn't do anything else. It was so bad they had to fully reboot their computer, but somehow they were able to open the file and put it on a CD, like a physical CD, before they turned the computer off, somehow. But it gets better. So they reboot their whole PC and whatever, and they open the file and nothing bad happens, which I guess also makes perfect sense. And so they start the episode up, and the episode basically, it starts off normally. The animation is a little wonky, which is pretty regular for a lost episode creepypasta. Kind of shows a bit of the dated nature of it as well. By the way, I should clarify this story. I usually give a rundown of the story. I'm sorry, this is only the second episode. I forgot. This was posted in 2010 by whoever's on the screen, so there you go. But anyway, another interesting thing is that as they go on, they mention how all the characters are way worse versions of themselves. Lisa is super anxious, and like Marge is rude, and Homer's a jerk, and Bart hates his family. And I found this very funny because, again, I could suspend my disbelief for this, so I guess that gives points, but also it takes away from the scare factor because it's like flanderization is literally a term from The Simpsons because their characters decayed so much over a long period of time. So that's just how The Simpsons ended up. It's not really a, wow, this is so disturbing, dude, I can't believe it. I guess it is weird because it's season 1 and they're not supposed to be like that yet, so that I guess would throw you off. I guess I'll give that kind of some credit, but it's just pretty funny to think about. Anyway, they go on a plane, and Bart's messing around on the plane. You know how Bart gets. And Bart gets sucked out of the window. And he falls to the ground and he dies. Now, what's funny to me is that this isn't really that weird for The Simpsons. Now, some may say, well, it is weird, Girisco, because The Simpsons doesn't do death. They only do that in Treehouse of Horror, which is exactly what I would respond. What if it's just a Treehouse of Horror episode that they drafted? Wouldn't that make a lot of sense? Think about that as this story continues, because I just want you to think about that and think about how scary this really is. Remember, this was so terrifying that the creator of the show was physically shaking and pale when he just heard of the episode, okay? I want you to remember that as you think about the Treehouse of Horrors where people die all the time in worse ways. So they show Bart's body on the ground and it's hyper-realistic. Although in this story they call it photorealistic, but unfortunately that's still dated because that's a big creepypasta cliche. Now, I guess this could kind of be off-putting, but also, I mean, smiling friends is a thing now, and even back when SpongeBob was a thing, having that photorealistic close-up was more comedic than anything else. Also, Flapjack did that. I'm sure there's a lot of other cartoons, but those are the ones that I know. So it doesn't really throw me off or creep me out when stories will say, oh, that's hyper realistic, it's throwing me off, I'm creeped out. I'm just like, okay, they do that for comedic relief in shows all the time. I don't know. Anyway, then they skip forward and I think the family's in the living room and they're crying. They're just crying their eyes out. And the crying becomes more and more realistic. It gets to the point where the author's like, wow, this sounds like a real person grieving. Like, this is crazy. This cannot be acting. Which, in itself, I could actually say is kind of disturbing, right? Because it's like, there could be a whole side, you know, a kooky side plot about like, oh, Matt Groening had to like, I don't know, you know, allegedly, he had to like do something horrible and then something happened to somebody's family and he recorded them crying so he could put it in the Simpsons episode, but it doesn't go that way. I just made that up. Anyway, the crying gets more intense and realistic, and then it basically gets to the point where the visuals are distorting a lot. And also, one thing that I actually did think was kind of creepy was like, there were faces appearing in the window, but they couldn't make them out, which I also thought could have gone well with my fictional side plot of this already fictional story. It's like, oh, it's the people's family that like he took out or something. But also, I did write down in my bullet points that I do think that it would be kind of creepy to see the distorting visuals. And I think if it was done right, if someone did like a remake of this, cough cough, vibing leaf, but if someone did a remake of this, I think it could be pretty unnerving and scary. Well, not just vibing leaf, anyone that's good at it. There's a lot of people that are good at it probably, so, you know. After this interesting sequence, though, we get sent forward an entire year. We just get like one of those SpongeBob time cards, and they're like, 1 year later. So 1 year later, we see that the family is very gaunt. They're very thin. They have neglected themselves, clearly because they're so depressed over the death of Bart, which I find a little bit ironic coming from the family that was, you know, what Homer was choking him all the time, and Lisa kind of didn't really like him like that. I don't know if they would be messed up this bad a year later. Like, I'm sure they'd be sad about it, but I don't think they'd be like, I can't eat, dude. Bart's gone, dude. And the town would probably celebrate. You know, he's a menace. Also, apparently, Maggie and the dog aren't there anymore, but the problem is they never mention Maggie and the dog in this story at all, but I get what they're saying. They're saying that apparently the family just was so wrought with grief that they probably neglected the dog and Maggie until they died, which is very creepy. But also doesn't, you know, I mean, it's creepy, but again, I could see that in Treehouse of Horror. I think we tend to forget, like, there was a Treehouse of Horror where Homer literally ate himself to death. Literally. Like, I had to reinforce it with a second literally, because I know literally is used very sparingly nowadays, but he literally physically eats himself until he dies. So, I feel, you know, that's a little bit creepier than Bart falling out of a plane. You know what I mean? That's all I have to say about that. Eventually, they decide, okay, we're gonna go to the graveyard. So the family, you know, Marge, Lisa, and Homer all walk through the neighborhood, and as they're walking, like, the houses are getting more and more gross and abandoned. I don't know if that's just to show that, like, Bart is buried somewhere really cheap. I don't know why they did that, because I know in the show they act like Bart and the family is like kind of broke. Even though they live in a nice house, they kind of act like the family's not very well off. So maybe they were just too poor to put him in a nice cemetery, so they put him in one in a bad area. That's kind of how it felt. I think what it's really supposed to represent, though, if I were to kind of put my thinking cap on, is like the decaying state of the family's life, you know? Because at first they're walking in the nice neighborhood, they're on Evergreen Terrace, and then they walk past these more and more decrepit and decaying houses, much like how their life was normal, and then Bart passed away and they look like this now, and their life has gotten to this point. That's just my guess. I have no way to back that up, and maybe I'm making the story sound better by doing it, so take it with a grain of salt. So I'm sorry, this is kind of funny to me, but when they get to the grave, Bart's just laying in front of the tombstone. Like, they didn't even care. I don't know if they paid them like $5 and so they didn't even care enough to bury Bart. They were just like, just dump him on that guy's gravesite. Like, who cares? Like, the tombstone doesn't even say Bart's name. It's some other guy. They just dumped him there so the family wouldn't know, because they were like, they won't check. You know, look how depressed they are. They've been in their house for months. Anyway, but yeah, so Bart's just laying there, and of course they start crying, which pretty normal. I mean, they're looking at their family member's corpse. Eventually, though, they just stop crying and they just stare. And I wrote in my notes, because I genuinely feel this way, if that happened, like if I was watching that and that happened, I would actually start getting super unnerved. Because I would assume I was either going to get a really cheap jump scare or something wild was about to happen. Because to go from this like intense crying to just silence and they're just staring at Bart's body, I would probably be sitting there like so tense waiting for something to happen. So I gotta give the story props on that one. Homer then tells a joke, but the problem is the joke isn't actually audible in the story. So I don't know if we're supposed to just make it up in our head and that's the creepy factor, or I'm guessing that's what it is. But I just found it funny because the guy's like, oh, well, it's said in accounts that Homer tells a joke, but I couldn't hear it in mine. And then I started to think about it when I was reading the story, and I was like, hold on. I even wrote it down. Who is publicly giving accounts? What happened to everybody that worked on this episode keeping it a secret and not wanting anyone to ask Matt Groening about it? But now all of a sudden, there are accounts of people that watched this episode that they're corroborating with? Suspension of disbelief points gotta get docked again, because that doesn't even make any sense. So then they look at the graveyard and it like zooms out and there's all these celebrities. Some of them at the time wouldn't have even been people that were celebrities yet or even existed. Some people are people that already passed away, so it had their birth and death date, you know, on the tombstone. And the graveyard just has all these celebrity names, I should clarify, on all the tombstones. And they go back home and it shows the family sitting there, and I guess they're supposed to, it was kind of worded weird, but I think they're supposed to look the same as how Bart looks, so they've all passed away basically. And of course they say they were drawn hyper realistically, so another cliche there. But I assume that means that they just neglected themselves until they passed away. I'm not sure. That's my best guess. But at the end, they give us a big old twist. And the big old twist is that on the tombstones, every single celebrity that's still alive has the same death date, which I feel in the middle about. Now, this is weird. I like to give more concrete answers, like I like it or I dislike it, but I was kind of conflicted about this one. Part of me was like, oh yeah, you know what? That's kind of cool, because they didn't give a specific date, so there's no way to really, I don't know. You can always be speculating about it, right? Because it could be any year. But at the same time, it also kind of feels like, I don't know. Like, I feel like it's actually not that bad, but there's something about it that kind of feels like it's a little cheap, or maybe it's just that it feels old, or maybe I'm just being cynical because it's an old creepypasta. Although I love this creepypasta, I'm nostalgic about it. But I don't know. It just, there's credit that it could make you think a lot, and it also could make you think like, what? How did Matt Groening know this? And did he just write this to be creepy, or is this true? And how would this happen? Is there gonna be some horrid nuclear fallout? I don't know. But anyway, let's get into the actual rating of the story. Now, first of all, I did, of course, hear this story years ago when I was a kid, when I first got into creepypasta. Back then, I don't remember, again, being terrified by it. but I do remember enjoying the story, and I definitely found it somewhat creepy. The reason I say I didn't remember being terrified is because there's certain stories we'll get into later in this series that I remember objectively being terrified by. And I know that, shout out Billy Styler, we love Billy Styler over here. Billy Styler made a video on the Dead Bart creepypasta, and he basically implied it was like super crazy scary. And I don't think I'm necessarily gonna go that route. The thing about Dead Bart is, there's a couple concepts in it that I could see on a visual medium being very unnerving. However, as an overall story, especially in the modern age, I do not believe this story is still scary. I don't think it holds up at all. There are way too many plot holes and errors that if you think about it even a little bit, it completely destroys your suspension of disbelief. And on top of that, it's just, there's not a lot besides that. Like, the main fear factors are that things in this episode are supposed to be abnormal from what they usually do, and that things are hyper realistic. But a lot of that stuff is used in other cartoons and is not creepy. And as far as the death goes, that's not uncommon for The Simpsons. So overall, even compared to my first experience, I think when I was a kid, it probably creeped me out more. No duh. So even then though, it wasn't, you know, something that was horrifying to me or kept me up at night like other stories did, which is ironic because I think objectively worse written stories kept me up at night more than this. But, you know, overall, I'm saying no today. It's not scary. But I hope you enjoyed this episode. Another one will be out next weekend. This time, I'm hoping that my next video will not be as big as the video that I uploaded before this, because that video took way too many hours, and considering my channel is already on life support, it was not the best time investment, unfortunately. I still love the video. I'm glad I put it out, and the way YouTube is, something I've had times where a video did views and then randomly 2 months, 3 months later, it just blew up. So I will keep putting content out. I'm hoping to get them out between each larger video to kind of tide you guys over for the big Giarisco fans, and also for the people that may watch these videos because they really like creepypasta and more like literary analysis and video analysis and media analysis in general. You guys can come over to the channel and know that you'll continue to get this content. You guys can be recurring watchers even if you don't like the other stuff that I do here. And I really enjoy talking about this stuff, and I'm glad that I finally decided to pursue this idea because I think it's going to be really fun as time goes on. And I hope that before the year's over, one of these episodes will actually do like crazy views, because it would be really fun for me to like sit down and talk about like Smile Dog or something that they get like 100,000 views. But anyway, it's not just about the views. I also like entertaining people. There's a lot of moving parts to it. All right, I'm out of here. Have a good day, and I'll see you in my next wacky video.